Hello, this is Benjamin Boyce. Today's interview is with Mary Hudson, who has spent some time teaching in the New York public education system. And she wrote an article about this that was published in Quillette that I read that was very compelling. And so I reached out to her, and it turned out that she'd been watching my stuff on the Evergreen State College. So it just naturally happened that we found all this technology at our disposal and began to speak. And I recorded it, and I edited it down, and now it's here for you. We talk about, I guess we just talk about education and kind of how the system is failing the students. That should be enough for you, right? Well, if it's not, you're just going to have to continue to watch this video. Here's Mary Hudson.
I really liked your work on Evergreen. That must have been quite an experience, huh?
Oh, yeah, I was in the belly of that beast. And then I turned into the host of maggots eating it from the inside out. No, that was the ideology that they accepted. That wasn't me.
Was that you in the film with when they were giving Brett Weinstein such a hard time? Was that
Everybody
you standing
thinks that's
there?
me. No.
Oh, it's not you. Okay. I'm sorry.
No, I didn't know him till after the fact, ex post facto.
Really?
With that, yeah. You worked for your entire career as a teacher, or
No,
did you hop in?
I'm old enough to have been a secretary for my sins. I hated that. But I always taught a little bit too. When I lived in Europe, I stopped quickly being a secretary. I hated it. And then I did some courses in teaching of English as a foreign language, which I really love to do. And in fact, I'm doing it again on a voluntary basis here in my village.
Oh, cool.
So that's nice. Yeah.
But you were embroiled in the U.S. education system.
Yeah, in the New York City education system for 9 years. That's all. I mean, I've taught I lived in Europe. My husband was a European, so I lived over here a lot. And
Okay.
so, yeah, but I've taught here, there, and everywhere, all different levels. But it's my vocation. I really love teaching, and especially language. Well, I would have preferred to teach other things, perhaps more intellectually engaging, but I taught foreign languages.
So what turned me on to you was a very harrowing piece that you that was published in Quillette about your experience as a New York educator. And,
That's right.
And before we get into that, I was just wondering, what are the types of attitudes that a student needs in order to enter into, like, the acquisition of a skill such as language? And how do you foster that attitude?
In the public school? Well,
Yeah.
I've been a very successful teacher when students are willing to learn.
Yeah.
And as far as I'm concerned, to learn a foreign language, the teacher has to speak mostly, if not entirely, in that language, the target language, the one that students are learning. And a lot of it is hamming up in theater, mime, intonation, work on pronunciation, and it's fun. I think it's a lot of fun. But I couldn't do it for 4 years when I was teaching in the bad schools because kids refused to engage. Mm-hmm. By the way, it's interesting that people think it's so harrowing. I just think it was awful. But I was surprised that people were so shocked by it, I suppose.
Well, I wasn't necessarily shocked, just filled with despair at the state of young people's attitude towards learning, especially in that environment where they're actually inculcated by the culture that's, kind of perpetuating amongst themselves to have a very negative view towards even presenting as somebody who's interested or curious at all. Yeah,
there's pressure put on them. There's definitely pressure put on the kids by their peers not to cooperate with the system, the man. That kind of terrible, terrible attitude. But what the real crime is, the fraudulent position of the education system, pretending to educate kids, and they're not doing it. They're giving them they're allowing the kids to destroy themselves. And I'm horrified by that. And I always was. When I taught in the system, I used to bore people to death of complaining about it. But it was harrowing. The only thing that makes me angry is the system. I don't even think the parents are to blame. Parents, I mean, as I've said before, the kids came to school well-fed, well-groomed.
Okay.
Parents, it's not parents' job to give a kid a formal education. So anyway,
Well,
but there are cultural attitudes, the gangster, all that nonsense.
yeah.
But you're not even allowed to say that it's nonsense. But I
Yeah,
don't
okay.
care what you're allowed to say. I say it.
Well, in a certain sense, it's kind of a war between two systems. Insofar as the culture that is anti-system or anti-learning is a system itself. It's not a hierarchical system. It's not a planned-out system. It's just a kind of emergent,
There are
playground.
hierarchies within it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it doesn't have like that evident structure of an administrator and, secretary.
No,
And that's what
absolutely
I'm
not.
saying.
No.
So,
No, but it's it's part of the post 1960s phenomenon. I mean, contraception changed everything. The family structure no longer had to be that straightforward. The man didn't have to stick around, and women could behave differently sexually. They didn't have to protect themselves so much, which had good and bad aspects. And I think this would not have happened without contraception. I'm not blaming contraception. I'm all for it, by the way. That's not the problem. But it changed society radically, which allowed subcultures, if you want to call them that, I don't know what a nicer word is, to flourish, where women didn't have to have a man around. And only now we're beginning to understand the terrible, I saw it firsthand when I was a youngster, the terrible situations women lived in, raising children without a man to support them. But we understand now just how drastic the sociological and psychological effects of that were.
okay, so what you're saying is that with the birth of contraception, a certain structure, a certain economic structure was loosened, which is that like a societal bond, enforced
bonds,
monogamy kind of thing, just kind of evaporated.
Yes.
Eroded really quickly,
And,
which led to people not using contraception and then breeding a bunch of children without that structure.
well, not even necessarily voluntarily not using contraception. I know people it happened to accidentally more than once.
Yeah.
So, and I'm all for women's liberation. I think women should have a right to choose with whom they have sex, if they have a child, whether they don't have a child, etc. So I'm not complaining about that. I don't have any right-wing attitudes to that at all. Maybe libertarian, perhaps, but not right-wing. I don't think necessarily the family structure is, the nuclear family was necessarily the best way to have children anyway. I think there are all sorts of family types, and I'm not necessarily against single parent families, although I see the terrible dangers of it.
Yeah. When there's in a sense, when the man is not strapped to a family, then the man doesn't develop certain skills or attitudes towards life that might, there's outliers of like that would lead to somebody being overly stressed and end up being very abusive because he is stuck in a situation that he can't get out of. But by and large, it might foster a certain sort of, let's just say, integrity, consistency, and then responsibility, and which would lead to an evaluation of the people in the family that he's taking care of that would then want him to train the children to also have those attitudes too, and have responsibility, farsight.
Absolutely, the manly virtues. And unfortunately, manliness is not even appreciated anymore. Much more in Europe it is than in America. And I'm really sad to see in America such unhealthy attitudes. Pathological attitudes to the male now, in particular the white male.
Why is the male so maligned, do you think? You think it's fashionable? You think it's a tick or revenge or envy?
I think it's also a part of a system that's been brewing for many, many years, and also in the public education system. Most of the teachers in it are female. And I remember years ago being in Central Park, I think with my daughter when she was little, and I saw a school teacher, and she was so awful to the little boys for being boys. She was so castrating to this boy, and I was horrified to see that. Little boys are so sensitive, and I think they're more sensitive than females. In fact, I've helped raise lots of kids, so I have a lot of experience with children, and I love children. And there's a tenderness and a delicacy about the little male, the vulnerability. My husband used to say he'd take my daughter to school, and these little girls would all be doing things together and having, organizing everything. The little boys would be wandering around, lonely the cloud, not knowing what to do. And it took his heart away. And I understand that. Little boys are they're less social creatures, and it's harder for them to work in that environment. It is. It's very hard to keep a little boy in his seat, much harder than for girls. So I think the public education has contributed to that unhealthy attitude towards the male. I'm not blaming it. All the world deals on the on the American public education system, but it's part of societal attitudes that have been brewing for a long time and are coming to head now with the ghastly identity politics business. Funnily enough, in my teaching experience as a foreign language teacher, most of my really, really good students were females. The vast majority of good students were females. But the very best were the occasional man.
Why do you think?
Huh? I don't know, because, I've been studying a bit of this lately myself, that, Pareto distribution?
Yeah,
the males,
the stupidest and the smartest, yeah.
Yes, yeah. And in my experience as a teacher, that was the case as well.
Back to the administration versus the culture of anti-education or uncuriosity, or I guess like that dynamic that you wrote about New York City, and like the administrators, they were not dealing with it at all, it seems like, because they were hamstrung. There's no discipline, there's no ability, there's no power at all that the authority figures have over the youth.
In the situation of the schools that I worked at, were the bad schools, not Brooklyn Tech. That was fairly run of the mill, I thought. I wasn't impressed by the level of the education. But the administration was terrified of being called racist.
Okay.
Everybody's terrified. So I don't really care what you think. I care about these children's education.
Yeah.
And we are not giving it to them. We are pretending to give it to them. We're allowing them to sit around in the classroom talking amongst themselves, if you're lucky, if you can control the class, and that was all that was expected of you. A few kids would learn something from osmosis, because I did speak some French to them and did try to conduct a class, but it was not easy because you were ignored and despised as a representative of that system.
What does that say about discipline or certain views on curiosity and responsibility and hard work and learning, that to enforce those is racist?
No, because of the anti-discrimination laws. Back in the 60s, there were a lot of civil rights activists who actually wanted only black teachers teaching black kids, which I thought was crazy and stupid and racist. But there was always a bullying element, always in life, but also in the schools, where some of the civil rights legislation, and I'm no expert in the law, but I know that we worked under all sorts of levels of laws. You could not put a child outside the classroom. In particular, Washington Irving was 98% black, African Americans. If you put a kid outside the classroom, ipso facto, it was a black kid, so I don't see how that was racist. But the laws themselves, that was the problem. We have to change those laws, as I said in that article. That's one of the things, I think it's the most important thing to do. We cannot have a system, if you have one adult and 27 kids, I think, or even more than that, was the minimum class. 27 teenagers and one adult in the classroom, that's a balance of power.
Yeah.
And the teacher has to have a very strong personality to deal with that. especially in a lawless situation. There are no laws that the kids have to obey.
Yeah.
So most of them take the path of least resistance. They just say, F you, we're not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
F you and your education.
Mm-hmm.
They never said what use is French anyway. Some kids actually wanted to learn it, and some kids knew a bit, especially when I was in one of the schools, because we had kids from Haiti and so forth. So, but it was an ethos of saying, no, we're not doing this. And they got away with it because of the laws that teachers work under.
And those laws were created...
Yes, during the Civil Rights era, I think.
Yeah.
Or certainly subsequent to that.
And you think that there needs to be some reform and like looking at like the outcomes of the laws and then like...
No, they don't.
So there's none of that.
No. And even at the highest levels now. You've heard Amy Wax talk to Professor Lowry at Brown? She's a Penn State, or she's one of the Pennsylvania, she's a law school teacher.
Yeah.
And the level goes all the way up.
Yeah.
The poor, and we're accepting kids, as you know, at Evergreen. That was probably the most egregious example of it I've ever heard of. But it's happening at the best schools. It's happening at all levels. To me, that is so wicked. You shouldn't do that to kids. And as I also said in that article in Quillette, I understand the psychological mechanism that the kids are working under. You expect less of me, I'll show you.
Yeah.
I'll give you a lot less.
Yeah.
And I used to
so they want to excel at lowering the bar in a way.
Yes, and they have. They've succeeded, unfortunately. And American society has let them do that.
The civil rights era made some legislation to try to boost sectors of society, the underrepresented and the oppressed levels of society.
Yes.
They did it in a way that, do you think was short-sighted or was idealistic?
Absolutely.
Or
Both. Idealism tends to be a bit myopic, I think. I don't think there were any bad intentions. There were only good intentions, but it was not well thought out.
Yeah.
I remember years ago, I think I was living in Europe at the time when I first heard of affirmative action, and I said, that's such a terrible idea. So-called affirmative action. You allow people, with less of a grade because of the color of their skin. That encourages only laziness. Mm-hmm. Well, and we see the proof is in the pudding. We see it. And, kids are kids. I don't care what color they are. You don't expect much of them, you're not going to get it. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And the school system doesn't expect much from them.
Well,
and it's a crime.
Expectations are, in a way, supremacist.
Not only expectations, but oh Christ!
In a way, I mean, the expectations are like demanding something. No, I can see how they're grading on people, like where you're expecting so much from these poor. No,
I'm sorry.
That don't know anything.
I grew up poor.
Yeah, I was speaking more about the condescending attitude towards the underprivileged, let's say writ large, and the oppressed, right? And like this poor community. Let's help this poor community by not expecting anything from them, or giving them what they want. Like it's like, okay, that's very short-sighted.
What you think they want.
What you think they want, yeah, but it's not able to breach. It seems like unable to breach to that next level, and then it's reinforced by the people who game that system to get what they want out of it, and then able to like rely on your fear of being called all these nasty names to not actually fix or change anything.
Well, they're just people, they like anybody else. They deserve to have their talents developed, but in order to develop your talents, you have to work hard. And kids are taught that anymore. White kids aren't taught that either, unless from their families, not from the school system. I mean, people always just say education has to be fun. No, it's not. After a certain age, after that magical age, you sort of knuckle down and do things that are hard to do. Sorry, that's how you develop your talents. But even when I was teaching that, people had this idea that education had to be fun. No, when you're in high school, it's no fun at all. You have your fun outside of the classroom. So those basic attitudes people have to have a bit more common sense, for heaven's sake.
Yeah. I wonder if that's
human nature.
I wonder if that's just not the inevitable byproduct of prosperity, where you're like, I don't have to work. I get everything that I need. Like, I don't really have to work. I can just type in some buttons and get some pleasure, right? So you get stuck on these small loops of pleasure rather than like knuckling down and finding fulfillment in that thing called your extended intention to go out and to actually build something is foreshortened by these small little reactions.
But that's why Jordan Peterson is so popular nowadays, because he's telling young men and young people, everybody, young and old, life is tough, and you have to contribute. The only meaning in life comes from being responsible for yourself and the people around you, and ultimately to your society. People are thirsting for that message because they haven't got it all those years. All those years that I was teaching in the public school system, nobody ever taught you that. I used to say to the kids, I'm feeling my feelings. I said, nobody cares about your feelings. Of course, now they do. But I said, your feelings don't matter. It's your intellect that matters. It's developing your capacities that matters. Yeah. But no, I was the only one saying that, weirdly enough.
Well, if education can't be fun, how are we going to get the kids addicted to learning? Curiosity.
I think there's incite their curiosity. I think there's an innate curiosity. Some people are more curious than others, and I think people who have curiosity are the blessed. If you're born as a curious person, you will go far. But I think everybody's curious about something. I mean, the kids that I taught in high school were just so curious about each other's sex lives, of course. Gossip. I think he was even D.H. Lawrence many years ago. He was from a working class community in Nottingham. I think his father was a miner. The great writer D.H. Lawrence. He wrote Lady Chatterley's Lover and Women in Love and all that. Brilliant man. He said the middle classes have a very broad education. They have a much broader view of the world. Working class people had depth. There's a depth to working class people. Their world is narrower, but they see very deeply within it. And I thought that was an interesting observation. So, the better educated you are, in a sense that the more you know about the world. But then you're spread out more. But if you don't have that knowledge, your personal life becomes so important. And I saw that with the kids I taught. Their whole life was absorbed by what I would call gossip, but they were interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, that was the education that they were experiencing, or the field
they were
of
curious
knowledge.
About. Yeah.
Huh.
But the brighter of them would have loved to be educated, but they couldn't under those circumstances.
Yeah.
So it's a terrible situation, and the adults have refused to take responsibility for it. As I said, they don't even admit that it's happened. So we have this whole cover-up system, up through. We're just denying what actually is going on, which has made things not necessarily worse for the African American community, but it could have been so much better. It could have been. We could have had such more productive lives.
Well, it just seems like it's not impossible that it can't change, but the whole teaching of ideology and the way that the higher education system is pushing these very one-sided progressive ideals
terrible.
Provides even further cover for the children from the young people from understanding exactly what's happening to them, how narrow their lives are, because now they have this narrative of blame and oppression to obfuscate.
There's a rise in racism. There's an anti-white racism now that's become very fashionable on the left, which is abominable to me. And there's a rise of the extreme right. And it seems to me in reaction to the extreme left, whom they see as the elite, and they are. The Hollywood elite, the journalism elite, and so forth. So This has slowly been building up for a long time, but as you said, with the internet, it's an important point. It's
Quickened.
taken on great rapidity. It's much, much faster.
Could you, I don't want to put you on the spot, but could you recite some linguistic poetry from a foreign language to my ears? Do you have any on hand?
I can't, not by memory, but would you
Italian
like
or French?
French or Italian? I can do songs in French.
Oh, really?
Sure.
Could you wrap us up with a little ditty?
Oh, sure. Ayant avec lui toujours fait bon ménage, juste aimé célébrer sans être inconvenant. Dans ton corps féminin, ton plus beau apanage, que tout ce qu'ils l'ont vu le disent hallucinant. I don't know if you'll even be able to publish this, but it's a song by Georges Brassens, and I can't sing well anymore. A hymn to the feminine part. It's a beautiful, beautiful song.
Wait, there's only one feminine part?
Well, yeah, the major one.
Okay.
I don't know how to say it politely.
No, it's fine.
It's a hymn.
It's a quim hymn.
Yes, beautiful. Exactly. It's a quim hymn. All right. Thanks again.
Right. Yeah, Mary. Have a good night.
I'll be seeing you.
Yeah.
Thank you too.
Keep in touch.
Ciao.
All right. Ciao.
Take care. Bye.